Perspectives from the Void is an amateur philosophical podcast made by three friends who are probably drunk and or high. We are not experts. Do your own fucking research, and welcome to Perspectives from the Void.
A lot of stuff is impacted and rooted into our traumas, and I will claim that there's such thing as negative trauma and positive trauma.
It's coping though. I don't think they're comparing.
Yeah. So making it out of poverty is a positive trauma?
It's not.
It could be.
Because would you advocate someone to be poor then? The real world problem of calling something good trauma is that people start to justify it.
I'm no expert in the sense of other people's mental health. But
what are you familiar with?
I'm familiar with myself and only myself. Like, I've been in a decent amount of different relationships, right? So I got to see different lot of people like minds and how they work. I pay attention to that. I even tried dissecting some people emotionally, either if it was ethical or not, right? But I have done these things. And one thing that I come to find is a lot of stuff is impacted and rooted into our traumas. And I will claim that there's such thing as negative trauma and positive trauma.
I don't think that's a thing, but explain to me how you see it.
I just coined it right now.
Can you? I want you to just clarify because I have no idea what you mean by that, but I had an adverse reaction.
You mean like a?
I think I get what you mean.
You mean like
trauma,
like the influence positive change in your life, or you mean like because essentially what the root of what trauma means is doesn't there's nothing positive about it.
I mean that's why you put positive in front of it. Because I believe like there are certain like things that will stay forever, and in reality we don't know if it was good or bad, but it serves us in our futures.
But I get what you mean with that, because there are certain people that like where you could be like, the struggle taught me this, right? That doesn't mean it's good that I went through it. That doesn't mean anything there, and it still will affect you in other ways, right? Like nothing is purely positive and purely negative, right? Like you could be like, I've worked with hella jobs with people who were like off meth and shit, right? Mm-hmm. And off that shit, they was a good ass worker. They got their check, they didn't bother nobody, they were just really excited, and they'll talk about some random shit. And I'd be like, yeah, cool, bro. All right, I'm gonna do my job now, but you go have fun. They didn't bother me. That was how they functioned. And in that way, that's a traumatic thing that they're taking to put in their bodies, right? But it helps them to do one thing, but that doesn't mean that that substance is good. Just because we've gone through somebody and had some trauma, like it might add in some ways, but that doesn't mean the whole thing is good. So like there's good stress and there's bad stress, but I think with trauma is just trauma. Trauma is just trauma. I don't even think you can phrase it as good or bad. Trauma is just trauma. Not to say that there isn't trauma that happened that can lead to positive things, but like for an example,
exactly.
But I think of trauma that may have had a positive outcome for someone. I think about like maybe Michael Jackson and his siblings when they were getting beat and pressured to be great performers, became one of the most iconic artists of all time. It was ultimately to his detriment because he never recovered from that trauma from his childhood. So in itself, trauma is still, no matter the good things that may come out of it after, it's still.
I think that trauma in and of itself is necessarily negative. Like it's not something you would want to wish on anybody. It's not something that is good ever. But I do think that coming out of trauma, the results of trauma is positive and negative. The coping of trauma is positive and negative. Like there are more varieties in the response to it, but trauma itself, I always see negatively.
Yeah, I definitely see where you guys are coming from, because it is, important to be careful with certain things that impacts people's lives. The reason why I'm willing to coin this term, positive trauma or negative trauma, because human beings, we are supposedly quote-unquote free autonomous beings living in a universe that's full of many different possibilities. Some people call it destiny or fate, some people call it probability and chance. And where I'm going with this is we don't genuinely know the results and the actual causality of certain things where it's really meant to bring us. Because we're just humans. We can only see from our perspective. And I'm willing to like play with the idea of a concept such as positive trauma, because I believe it's important to take certain things back and to change the perspective on it.
Sounds like a oxymoron.
I get what you're saying, where there can be positive elements, but like positive elements is different than a positive totality. So like if we're looking at it from a consequentialist point of view, right, and talking about like what is the end result, right? You could talk about Michael Jackson. That was a good example. In one sense, you could be like, he was able to do this, and for some people that'd be like, wow, that's great, but you don't know what the fuck was going through his head. You don't know how he did every day. He died off an overdose, right? Off being prescribed by a doctor. Now he shouldn't have died there, but like the fact that he was taking some things mean he was susceptible to it. They're not here they blame for it. It's a totality of things. Good trauma, like I don't want to encourage anyone for being happy of like the things that they had to, or saying that that is the reason why you get there, because that's toxic as fuck. That's like the person using meth saying that my meth is the only reason I can do anything I'm doing.
There is a need to define trauma, because I think I'm thinking about trauma and I'm trying to figure out an instance of positive trauma, right? So I can see if
I already have one.
After I go. Dictionary has it as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience.
Okay, so I have an
Emotional
example.
Shock following a stressful event or physical injury, and yeah, so.
When white people realize what racism is.
That's
That
trauma,
is a trauma.
which is positive trauma, potentially.
It is positive, because once they realize what racism is, they can further work. But it is a trauma. They are taking their world full of
Whose
bliss
trauma?
and idealism, their own trauma, because what they're doing is breaking their own mindset, breaking their own security.
Personalize and not just realize it, because you can like objectively in your head view something as happening
more of a,
and believe it in your heart, right? There's different levels to it, I would say.
I think
I
that's,
do
that's
think
more
a
of
lot of
a
times
realization,
but
but
that's
I
because they grew
I
up
wouldn't
with it.
categorize that as trauma. I would say maybe a mother of a mixed child finding out her uncle is like super racist and had a Klan robe or something. That could be a trauma, but someone recognizing that they're racist, I don't feel. I mean, depending on, it could be trauma depending on how they react to it.
True. True.
Based on the definition, but it has to be something that is a troubling experience that sticks with someone, you know, longer than the moment.
Hit it, Tasha.
Yeah. So, an example of a positive trauma, I believe it's like basic training. They keep you up for like 3 weeks. Wake you up around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They break you down, tell you that you're a piece of shit. No, the whole 9 yards. But what's happening there is getting rid of your entitlement. And when you come back into society, you don't have much entitlement anymore, because you realize that you're just another person. And it makes you, like, at least for me, treating people with a sense of a different dignity, because at the end of the day, some people think they're entitled to certain things that they haven't earned.
I don't know if that's.
That just sounds like conditioning to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if that's positive trauma
Everything
or
is
like
conditioning, though.
intentional trauma to induct you into a cult.
But
that's
everything's
personally
conditioning.
because I hate the military. Like, I
Yeah.
just have
So you
feelings.
so you have a confirmation.
I have a bias,
All right, well,
right?
Poverty as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Poverty as a whole is some shit where there's a lot of people right there being like, okay, I've lived in this, I'm not gonna live like this anymore, right? And they can have that motivation. They're the people who sometimes are workaholics. They're the people that are just like, I'm gonna work 15 hours a day because look, I'm not gonna be broke at the end of the day, right? Yes, that is good that you're able to do that, and that is a positive aspect, but there's a lot of other shit in your life that's probably lacking if you're doing that much onto one fucking thing.
I mean, all right, so the definition is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So, like, again, that's, each individual is going to be different. For example, the night of the riots, like that same night, I live in Northside, so me and Opie, we hear gunshots like literally on like a block away or whatever. It was like 600 feet or some shit. There's someone who's never heard gunshots or don't feel comfortable where they're living, that could be a traumatic experience. But for me, I'm not fazed by it, so I'm not gonna say it's trauma. But also too, if you're having an experience that is, you feel is positive, it's not trauma then. But if it But down the road, if you start to feel a type of way or you feel unpleasant about it, then it is trauma. But either way it goes, based on this definition, it's not.
And like, I just want to say, like, I'm not going off that definition. Remember, I literally preface my comments by saying I'm coining a new term. You know, new terms are made every single day in society.
Based on but there's probably a term already for the term you think you're creating.
Okay, and that might be perfectly fine. But like a deep disturbance in someone's psyche, whatever, you know, can be positive. I really believe so. Because, you know, it depends on the person of how they go about their lives.
Positive
and how you value that positivity.
How do you value it? Like, and how do you use it?
It's relative.
So, like, you know, for
for
example, if I had the trauma of growing up poor and I never really had shit, I know what it's like to value the minimum thing. So that trauma of being poor and not being able to afford stuff, you know, and I've got to go on certain trips. Now I can appreciate, well, man, I'm so glad I got a roof over my head. I'm so glad, you know, that I'm getting an education.
That's coping, though. I don't think that's
inherent. Yeah.
So making it out of poverty is a positive trauma?
It's not.
It could be.
Because would you advocate someone to be poor then?
That's what I'm saying. I think
because in order for it to be a positive trauma, you have to be like, everyone should be poor so that they know how it is. And I wouldn't say
understand what you're saying. I just think that
people
term you're using specifically with the word trauma isn't fitting for what you're trying to say. Based on definition,
I see.
You know what I'm saying? If you feel you want to create a new word, and I'm not even trying to be funny, but you know, it's up to you. But I'm just saying, there's terms is pretty. I don't know the exact term for it.
Yeah, I know.
There's a term for what you're trying to say.
And like, it may be. But to tie it, because I know we're running out of time on this topic, but tie it into mental health. I guess the genesis of where I'm coming from, with the even attempt of coining a term of positive trauma, is taking back what was lost, taking back what has been hurt, taking back what has been damaged, and using it in service for you. Because a lot of people, they let these things affect them to the point where they can't do certain shit in life, where like, you know, like it's affecting them in a way where like you're not living a full life and they're only looking for gratification instead of looking for the deeper meaning of things. And my mind as a philosopher, it naturally does that. So I'm willing to do more research on that topic at some point. But I believe in the mental health aspect, it is important to combat these negative terms and take it back and use it as your own. Because at the end of the day, it's all a social construction anyway.
All right, wait, everybody, let's start saying their last pieces on.
Yeah, okay, I'll use this as my final statement on this.
Yeah.
I'll say my last piece.
What I would say really comes down to it is when you're doing an experiment, right, you have a control group, right? And so you're looking at something like, okay, this is reality A, this is reality B. Which would be different, right? You have double-blind studies and be like, okay, this person's got a placebo medicine, this person's got the real medicine. What are the effects? So the thing with trauma, right, is that, yes, you might have been able to overcome that in that situation, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't have overcome it even better without the trauma. We don't know the alternatives, right? We can only guess. And as humans, we like to kind of break shit down to an easy thing, like A equals B equals C, but it's like, there are so many variables from the butterfly effect and everything that we don't even know what the fuck could have happened. And so the real world problem of calling something good trauma is that people start to justify it. Oh, you were raped, so now you will not wear those same clothing because you will learn from that experience. Oh, you were poor, so now you'll get money and you'll figure it out and you'll be grateful for your poverty. These have a lot of real world applications about like, oh, you got to struggle to figure something out. And that's the reason why we have a system where, oh, we can't give you welfare because you have to want it bad enough. And that's where I say is like, I get what you're saying on like some aspects could benefit you and could shape you in ways, but we don't know the control group, and therefore having that term has a lot of real world applications that I don't like, but I get what term you're using right there because I do recognize that sometimes certain things can motivate you in certain ways. But like I said, the totality versus like, you know, everything in life versus just that one aspect where maybe you're a little bit better at that.
Tim, I kind of agree with what you're saying. Tasha, I get where you're going. I think we took a lot of time to kind of more so dispute the definition of trauma more so than understanding, recognizing how to move on from trauma. I think it would have been a better and more fitting topic for us to talk about. But at the end of the day, I would say that it's important that people find ways to make sure they recognize and understand their feelings from their experience that may have been traumatic, and being honest with themselves, and then truly understanding if they moved on from it. Personally, I've had events that have been traumatic. Now that events I didn't think were traumatic and didn't recognize was traumatic till later down the road. But once I kind of recognized it, processed my emotions, it made it easier for me to move on, let go, and just kind of not let it conquer me, as you were mentioning.
I just have one thing to say. I think that the frustration comes with how trauma is reacted to, not to what trauma is. And I think I personally have a lot of frustration in trauma being used as an excuse. But it's not. It can be an explanation, but it's not an excuse. And I think that distinction can reconcile with the desire for positive trauma as a idea, right? So the desire for positive trauma comes with this idea that positive trauma comes from this idea that you want to be able to move on from it. You want to be able to find another way, because wallowing isn't a solution. So you want to be able to live, which I think is really admirable, and I think it's really important, and I think it's a very valid understanding of the experiences that people go through. But I also think that knowing that trauma can just be an explanation of what's happening, but not an excuse, can work well with that idea, in conjunction with it, to help understand it in ways that I can't articulate right now. So
I really like what Vlad said. Mental health revolves back to just health. Representation, it matters. Tayshawn was talking about misplaced aggression, agendaless knowledge, positive trauma, social media, using social media as a tool when it comes to mental health. I kind of wanted to ask someone to define empathy versus sympathy with me. And I didn't get a chance to talk about how capitalism and the patriarchy, how mental health and how intertwined with that, but there's always space and time to bash the patriarchy.